Welcome back to the Book Nook.
It's great to be back.
Now, listener, have you ever heard of the Einstein Syndrome?
It's a fascinating concept.
We're diving deep into it today with Thomas Sowell's book, The Einstein Syndrome, Bright Children Who Talk Late.
Right.
This isn't just going to be a quick summary, though.
No.
We really want to give you a deep understanding of this. Why do some really bright kids, some really gifted kids, have trouble speaking, have delays in speaking? And we want to do it without getting too technical.
Yeah, exactly.
So no jargon, just real insights and stories, things you can actually use and think about.
Real world examples, yeah.
Real world examples. So let's unpack what Sowell found. What patterns did he observe?
Well, right from the start, Sowell's very upfront. He says he's not a scientist or a doctor. He's more like an observer, just a curious person, like you, listener.
Okay, so he's approaching this topic from a kind of everyday perspective, not necessarily like a clinical, expert.
That's right. He's interested in the patterns, not the diagnoses.
So what exactly is he looking for? What's this Einstein syndrome all about?
The big question is, what are the common threads? What links these bright kids who just don't start talking when you might expect them to?
So we're talking about kids who are obviously intelligent, they're quick learners, they're picking things up, but they're just not verbalizing it.
Exactly. And so Wells really challenging the assumption that late talking automatically equals, problems, developmental problems, or lower intelligence.
Like if a kid isn't talking, by a certain age, people might automatically assume that something's wrong.
Right. And so Wells saying, hold on, not so fast.
And he uses some really interesting examples to make his point. Like there's a girl named Leslie who at 2 years old had really limited speech. Like she could barely talk.
Barely, but her IQ was measured at 139.
139. So clearly something was going on in her brain, right?
Yeah, and she had this amazing memory.
Oh, yeah. Tell us about that.
She learned to read early. She could count before she was 3 years old.
Wow.
She drew these really detailed pictures.
Like advanced for her age.
Yes. And she could sit there for ages, just absorbed in puzzles.
Okay, so she's clearly very bright, but the speaking was lagging behind.
Way behind.
What else did he find? Are there other examples?
Oh, tons. There's a story about a boy, the son of a Pennsylvania mother.
Okay.
At 2.5, he only said one word.
Just one word.
Amy. That was it.
That's it, Amy.
Even his grandfather, who was a physician, thought he was slow.
Oh, wow. So even a medical professional was fooled.
Yeah, and in kindergarten, he was still crawling around.
Still crawling.
And when he took a group IQ test, it said he was very, very average.
Okay, so not promising at all.
No, but later, this same boy scored in the top 1% for intelligence.
What?
And he became an engineer with a PhD, just like his father.
No way.
Yeah.
So completely blew those early assessments out of the water.
Absolutely. And there's another kid, Jerry Simmons. His teachers thought he wasn't gifted at all.
Because of?
His schoolwork was so-so, nothing special. But then, surprise, he took a test and qualified for the gifted program.
So again, those early impressions were totally wrong.
Yeah, they didn't see the potential there.
So these kids are kind of like hidden gems, right? Like there's this brilliance underneath, but you might not see it right away.
Exactly, listener. Don't judge a book by its cover or a kid by their early speech.
All right, so we've seen these individual stories, but did Sowell find any broader patterns in these kids' backgrounds? Like were there common threads in their families or anything like that?
This is where it gets even more interesting. Both Sowell and another researcher, Dr. Stephen Camarada at Vanderbilt, found something quite striking.
What's that?
They found a lot of engineers, mathematicians, and scientists in these kids' families. Close relatives.
Really? More than you'd expect in the general population.
Way more. So LaCole points out that, most kids don't have an engineer in the family. It's not that common a job.
Right.
But for these late-talking bright kids, it was much more common.
So are we talking about a genetic link here? Like maybe there's something inherited that makes them good at those analytical fields, but also delays their speech.
Could be. It definitely suggests affection.
Fascinating. And there was another interesting pattern, right? Something about musicians.
Yeah, there were a lot of musicians in these families, too.
Really?
So LaCole mentions Clara Schumann, the famous pianist.
Oh, yeah, I've heard of her.
She was a late talker herself, didn't speak until she was 4 or 5.
Wow.
And she seemed kind of indifferent to everything going on around her as a child.
Really? Not engaged at all.
But then she blossomed into this incredibly talented musician.
Amazing.
And there's Arthur Rubinstein, another world-famous pianist, also late talker.
Huh. So this link between delayed speech and musical talent keeps popping up.
It does make you wonder.
Yeah, like maybe different parts of the brain are developing at different rates in these kids.
Right, like maybe they're strong in some areas, but need more time in others.
Okay, so we've talked about family backgrounds, but what about their social development? Did Sowell notice any patterns there?
He did. In fact, he says social development is often a problem area for these children, especially when they're young.
So they might have trouble interacting with other kids.
Yeah, both Sowell and Camarada found that over two-thirds in Sowell's study and over half in Camarada's were rated below average or even way below average in social skills when they were little.
That sounds pretty worrying for parents.
It is a concern, for sure. But Sowell points out that these ratings were usually done when the kids were very young.
So they might catch up later.
He thinks so. He even mentions Clara Schumann again, saying she wasn't really interested in her surroundings until she was about 8.
Oh, interesting.
So it seems like as their communication skills improve, their social skills might catch up too.
So maybe it's a delay, not a deficit.
Oh.
Now, we've touched on this a bit already, but these kids often have really intense interests, right?
Oh, yeah, very focused.
How does that play into all of this?
Well, sometimes these interests can be so strong that they clash with what's going on in school.
So, like, if they're super into dinosaurs, but the lesson is about something else, they just tune out.
Yeah, they might find it boring, repetitive.
And that can lead to problems.
It can. Teachers might think they have attention problems.
Like ADHD.
Exactly. And so Wool even worries about kids being put on medications like Ritalin when maybe they just need something more stimulating to learn.
So it's like their brains are wired for something different, and they need a different kind of challenge.
Yeah, they might be bored, not disordered.
That's a really important point for parents and teachers to understand.
Absolutely.
So Will also talks about some cases where these kids were misdiagnosed.
Right? He does, and it's a little scary. Like, there's a boy named Billy who is really attached to a girl named Heidi at school. They were always together, so clearly he was capable of social interaction.
Yeah, he had a friend,
But some professionals still thought he might be autistic.
even though he had this clear bond with Heidi.
Yeah, they even tried to reinterpret his interactions to fit the diagnosis.
Wow, that's kind of disturbing.
It is. And then there's Brayden, who got labeled with pervasive developmental disorder after just a brief evaluation.
And that was wrong.
His parents really questioned it. They felt like maybe doctors are overdiagnosing these days to avoid lawsuit.
So it's like they're playing it safe, but at the expense of these kids.
Possibly. It's definitely a concern.
It makes you realize how important it is to get a second opinion, to really do your research.
Absolutely, listener. Don't just accept the first thing you hear.
So we've covered family background, social development, and the risk of misdiagnosis. What other strengths or abilities did Sowell notice in these kids, aside from the late talking?
A few things came up again and again. One was amazing memory.
Like they could remember things really well?
Oh, yeah. Parents would talk about their kids' incredible ability to recall details.
Wow.
And then there was math. Many of them were really good at math or loved puzzles,
Even at a young age?
even as toddlers. Like, they had this natural affinity for logic and numbers.
Interesting. And we talked about music earlier, too.
Right, music was a big one. So Will gives the example of Andy, who could hum along in the right key when his brother played the trumpet, even though he couldn't speak much himself.
So again, it's like they're gifted in other areas, but the speech is lagging behind.
Exactly.
Now, when a child is slow to talk, it's natural for parents to wonder if they did something wrong.
Absolutely.
What does Sowell say about that? Is it the parents' fault?
He says no, not usually. He points out that in many families, you'll have one kid who's a late talker and other kids who speak perfectly normally.
Even though they were raised the same way.
Exactly. He even uses his own family as an example.
So if it's not the parenting, then what is it?
He thinks it's more likely to be genetic, just normal variations in how genes are expressed.
So some kids are just wired to develop speech later.
That's what he suggests.
That makes sense. It takes the pressure off parents, too.
It does. It's not your fault. It's just how your child is developing.
So I'll also mention something about brain development being different in these kids, right?
Yes, he talks about the possibility of rededication of brain resources.
What does that mean?
He compares it to savants, those individuals with incredible abilities in specific areas.
Oh, right. Like people who can do amazing calculations or play music by ear.
Exactly. And some studies have shown that musical savants are more likely to be blind from birth.
Huh. So maybe the brain resources that would normally be used for vision are redirected to music.
That's the idea. And Sowell thinks something similar might be happening in late-talking kids.
So the brain might be focusing on other skills, like logic or music, and that's why speech is delayed.
It's a theory, but it's a fascinating one.
It is. Now, for parents who are listening and maybe recognizing some of these traits in their own children, what advice does Sowell give?
He has some really important things to say. First, get a professional evaluation, but don't just accept the first thing you hear.
In a second opinion.
Even a third if you need to. He reminds us that even experts don't have all the answers.
Right.
And he cautions against assuming that every evaluator is reasonable or that every assessment is perfect.
So be an advocate for your child.
Exactly. He also specifically recommends asking for a nonverbal mental test.
What's that?
It's a way to assess your child's intelligence without relying on language.
So you can get a clearer picture of their abilities, even if they're not talking much.
Exactly. And he mentions another expert, Professor Camarada, who always has kids checked by a doctor first.
Just to rule out any physical problem.
Right, just to make sure there's nothing medically wrong.
That's a good idea.
It is. And he also debunks some common myths about late talking.
Like what?
Like the idea that parents who anticipate their child's needs too much are causing the delay.
I've heard that one.
He says there's no evidence for that.
So don't blame yourself, parents.
And he also dismisses the idea that bilingualism causes delays.
So speaking multiple languages is okay.
He says it's fine. The kids might just start speaking a little later, but they'll catch up.
Good to know.
And he's cautious about early intervention programs.
Oh, right, those programs that are supposed to help kids catch up.
Yeah, but he's seen cases where those programs weren't right for the child and even caused them to regress.
So it's not a one-size-fits-all solution.
Definitely not. You have to really consider your child's individual needs.
Okay, last question. We often hear about autism in these discussions. What does Sowell say about the connection between late talking and autism?
He says some late talkers are diagnosed with autism, but many aren't.
So it's not a given?
No. And he points out that the autistic spectrum is huge with lots of variation.
Right, it's not just one thing.
And he says that the uneven development we see in these bright kids, the Einstein Syndrome kids, can sometimes lead to misinterpretations, just like it did with Einstein himself.
So people might jump to conclusions based on just one aspect of development.
That's right. And he says it's crucial to look at the whole child, their strengths, their challenges, their whole developmental profile.
So listener, if your child is a late talker, don't panic.
Don't assume the worst.
There could be a lot more to the story.
Exactly.
And Sowell's book, The Einstein Syndrome, is a great place to start learning more.
It really opens your eyes to the different ways kids can develop.
And it offers a lot of hope and reassurance for parents.
It does. It reminds us that every child is unique.
And that sometimes those who are a little slower to start talking might end up surprising us all.
They just might be the next Einstein.
Thanks for joining us in the Book Nook.
It's been a pleasure.